welcome back to my channel, and in today's video I'm going to be sharing with you my TBR for March. But before I get into the TBR for March, I am going to share with you the books that I read for my February TBR. I am pleased to say that I did manage to read all 6 of the books that I selected for my February TBR, although it was a bit touch and go as to whether I was going to get through them all. I think this month I didn't actually read any of my books from my TBR in the first portion of the month. They were all read in the later stage of the month, and so I was a bit nervous as to whether I was going to get through them all, but I did manage to do it and I'm really happy with what I read. It was a mixture of things this month in terms of ratings, but overall I think they were good, and I'm glad that I have managed to tick off some books from my TBR. So I'm going to just run through the books that I read and give you a quick synopsis and my quick thoughts on them, and then I'll share my March TBR with you. So the first book I read was Seduce Me at Sunrise by Lisa Kleypas. This is book 2 in the Hathaway series, and I really enjoyed this one. I gave it 4.5 stars, and on Goodreads I marked it as a 4-star. It wasn't quite a 5-star read for me. So in this one we follow Kev and Winifred, Kev Merrypen and Winifred, and their relationship is teased quite a lot in book 1. And I was really excited for this one because they have this attraction to each other. They have always been attracted to each other, but because of circumstances, Kev especially thinks that he is not good enough to be with Winifred, and so their relationship doesn't go anywhere for quite a long time. And that was one of the things that really made me rate this book a bit lower than a 5 stars. It was very frustrating, Kev's constant reluctance to get into this relationship, and that reluctance goes on throughout pretty much the whole of the book. The characters don't really get together until, I'd say, maybe the last 10-20%. It really takes a long time to get there, and at times it was very frustrating to read, but overall I did really enjoy this book. I really loved the family aspect in this series, and I cannot wait to read the rest of the books in the series. It's definitely worth a read, and this is the gorgeous step back that's in this edition. Definitely recommend this series if you've not read any of Lisa Kleypas' books. I would highly recommend checking them out. This is the one that I read for the historical romance prompt. Then I read The Mistake by Elle Kennedy. I gave this one a 3.5-star rating. So this one I didn't love as much as The Deal. I think on Goodreads I did round this up to a 4-star, but it's a 3.5-star that I gave overall. So this one I read for the audiobook prompt, and this one follows, what was his name? John Logan and Grace. And John Logan is part of the hockey team, and he is known around campus as being quite a player. He's been with a lot of different girls, and one night he ends up at Grace's room, I think looking for someone else's room if I'm not mistaken, and he ends up at her room, and she is she's not really had much experience with guys, and their relationship goes from there, and they spend a lot of this book not being together, but they do eventually get together, and I like seeing the journey of them getting together, but then this book has a lot of other elements going on. So John Logan's father is suffering, is an alcoholic, and we get to see a lot of John Logan dealing with that and the strains that puts on his and Grace's relationship, because he is very much aware that he might not always be able to be there for Grace because he needs to support his father. And this one, I like that element. I like seeing a bit more to the characters, having a background, but sometimes that does overtake from the actual romance, and I feel like that was the case in this one. I've only read a few Elle Kennedy books, and the ones that I have read I have enjoyed, but she seems to do this a lot with quite a lot of her characters, where there is some very difficult things that the characters are dealing with, usually with their parents. So I think in the first book the main guy's father was hitting him, and then this one we have the father being an alcoholic, and then in one of her other books we had the parent passing away. So there's a lot of trauma that she makes her characters go through, and sometimes that does detract from the actual romance, and this one I felt it detracted a bit too much, so that's why I gave it a 3.5. But I am excited to continue on with this series, and I definitely will be picking up the other books from this series. This is book 2 in the Off-Campus series. Then I read When in Rome by Sarah Adams. This one was my free choice book, and this one was my favourite that I read out of the books on my TBR. I gave this one 5 stars. I really love Sarah Adams' writing, and this series in particular I am really enjoying. This is the first book, so I have actually already read books 2 and 3. I did read this series out of order, and I went back to read this first book, and I was worried that I wasn't going to like this one because I obviously like the books 2 and 3, and sometimes, you know, the first book in the series is not as good as later books in the series, but this one did not disappoint. So in this one we follow Amelia and, what was his name? Noah. So Amelia is a pop star, and she has very famous, and she's been struggling with the fame side of things. Her schedule is very hectic. She doesn't really have time for a break, and she decides that she's had enough and wants to take a break, and so she ends up in this small town called Rome, in Kentucky. And while she's in the small town, she really appreciates the smaller things in life. She likes the quiet life. She likes the small town elements where everyone kind of knows each other, and it's a lot more relaxed than what she's used to. Noah runs the bakery in the town. His grandma ran the bakery, and she unfortunately has dementia and is in a care home, so Noah is now looking after the bakery, and it is their romance. Noah is very reluctant to get into the relationship. He very much loves living in the small town. He doesn't want to leave, and he's worried that being with a pop star is going to ruin his kind of small town life, but Amelia is very much all for the small town life. She wants to make that work with obviously her career, and I really love these two characters together. I like the side characters that we see in this book as well. The side characters really make up a whole family. This series follows the Walker siblings, so the other siblings get their own books as well, and they really do form a great family and adopt Amelia into their fold. And I really enjoyed reading this book and seeing where their relationship began, because I've read as I say, book 2 and 3, and in that book we obviously see their relationship at, you know, them as an established couple, but I really enjoyed seeing their journey to get to that stage. So really enjoyed that one, gave that one 5 stars. Then I read The True Love Experiment by Christina Lauren. This one I liked. I gave it 3.5 stars also. Rounded up to a 4, and this one is set in the same universe as the Soulmate Equation, which I read quite a few years ago. So in this one we have Fizzy and Connor, and Connor is a producer on a TV show. He normally does nature documentaries, but they're not doing so well on the channel, so his bosses decide to make him a producer on a dating show. Fizzy is a romance author, and she is going to be the contestant on the dating show. And the premise of this dating show is she's going to be set up with a bunch of different guys, and basically it's trying to find her perfect match. And in order to agree to go on the show, Fizzy kind of suggests to Connor, if he can find these different type of guys, she will then go on the show. And so she selects typical like romance tropes for heroes. So there's like a cinnamon roll hero, a cowboy, a vampire, like lots of the kind of typical romance heroes that we see. And it ends up being their relationship and their romance. And I enjoyed this one. In the synopsis, it mentions that Connor is a single father, and I really like single dad romances. It's one of my favourite tropes, but sadly we didn't get to see as much of that in this book as I would have liked. When it's a single parent romance, I do really like to see the kid being part of the story and seeing them interact with the hero or heroine, depending on if it's a single dad or single mum. I really like seeing that interaction, but we didn't really get that in this book, which is disappointing, as I say, when it is marketed as being a single dad romance. But overall, I liked this one. Some Christina Lauren's can be a bit hit or miss for me, but this one was good. Definitely not a favourite, but it was well worth a read, and I'm glad that I did read it and enjoyed it. Then for my, that was obviously my Afterlight pick, if you couldn't guess by the addition. And then for my audiobook, no, not audiobook, for my non-fiction read, I listened to the audiobook of The Third Gilmore Girl by Kelly Bishop, and I gave this one 4 stars. I did really enjoy this one. I didn't know much about Kelly Bishop's kind of career prior to Gilmore Girls, so it was really interesting to see her kind of recount her past, her career. She started out on Broadway as a dancer, which I didn't really know anything about, so that was really interesting to hear. And as with all of non-fiction biographies and autobiographies, I always think it's best to listen to them on audiobook. Kelly Bishop narrates this one, and I thought the audiobook was really well done. Definitely would recommend, if you're a fan of Gilmore Girls, then it's definitely worth a read. And then the last book I read was my Kindle book, and that was Watch Me by Stacey Kennedy. This one I didn't love as much as I hoped. I gave this one 3 stars and was probably the least favourite out of all of the books I read for my TBR this month. So in this one we follow Zoe and Reese. So Zoe, when she was at college, unfortunately experienced a incident where she was drugged and laid out in a kind of suggestive manner without any of her clothes on, or just in her underwear, I can't remember exactly, and pictures were taken of her and posted online, and she obviously received a lot of bad treatment because of that. A lot of people were like slut shaming her, and she really suffered through the last parts of her college years. And she decides to get revenge on the guys that did this to her. She goes to a sex club which is owned by Reese, and it's called Phoenix, and they put on a lot of different shows, and to prove to her, to the people that did, to the guys that did this to her, she is going to prove that she was a virgin and wasn't a slut after all. And she basically loses her virginity in one of these shows, and Reese is the one that is the other performer, and it ends up being their romance. So this book deals a lot with sexual abuse and assault, and there is mention of suicide as well. So definitely, if those are things that trigger you, then I would suggest avoiding this. But the premise of this sounded really interesting. I liked the idea of this book, but the execution I didn't necessarily love. The romance between Reese and Zoe was very quick, like it was very much insta-love, and I feel like we didn't really get much of an emotional connection between these two characters. It was very much a physical relationship that didn't really, I feel, develop further than that. So that's why I gave it 3 stars. I would be potentially interested in checking out more books in this series, because there is a relationship that is teased between one of her friends and one of Reese's friends, and I think that one could potentially be quite good. I'd be definitely interested to check that one out, but overall I didn't necessarily love this one. It was a little bit disappointing. And those are all the books that I read for my February TBR, and then now I'll be moving on to share the books that I plan to read for March. So now I'm going to select the books that I will be reading in the month of March. So as always, I'm going to start with my Afterlight book. So I have my little pot here, and we're just going to pick out the one that we're going to read. Oh, just making sure I get one there. Is that one? Yes. Okay, so this is the one that we're going to be reading, and this is For Her Consideration by Amy Spalding. So I'm just going to go and get that book, and then I will be right back. So here we have For Her Consideration by Amy Spalding, and this is the cover, and these are the pretty sprayed edges, and I'll just show you the naked cover. It's basically the same image just embossed onto the cover. Really, really pretty. Love the colour combination on this cover. And this one I think is an FF romance. I will read the synopsis for this one. And it says, What if her Hollywood job turns into her Hollywood ending? Since a crushing breakup 3 years ago, Nina Rice has written romance, friends and her dreams of scriptwriting out of her life. But a surprise meeting organised by Ari Fox, a young actress on everyone's radar, stirs up all kinds of feelings Nina thought she'd deleted for good. Ari is sexy, out and proud, and a serious control freak, according to Nina's boss. When Ari tells Nina she should be writing again, Nina suddenly finds it less scary to revisit her abandoned life than seriously consider that she is flirting with her. Between reconnecting with her old crew and working on a new script, a relationship with a movie star seems like something she'll definitely mess up, but what could be more worth the risk? So sounds really good. I'm excited to check this one out. I've not read anything from this author before. In fact, I think this might have been her... Was this her debut? Oh no, she's written other things. I've never read anything from this author before, and I'm excited to check this one out. So now we're going to move on to the other books that I've selected. So for my non-fiction pick, I've picked up this one. This one is a copy that I already obviously physically own. This is Why Not Me by Mindy Kaling. I have read a couple of Mindy Kaling's books. She's did like a short series for Amazon, which I read, and this, I think, is obviously one of her biographies. I think she's got a few books that she's written. I am a huge fan of The Office, and Mindy Kaling was a star in The Office, and yeah, I'm excited to check this one out. I don't have the audiobook for this one, sadly, so I will be physically reading it. I do feel like some of these non-fiction books are better listened to on audio, but I don't have the audio, so I'll be reading that physically. And then my free choice that I've chosen for this month is Tempting Boundaries by Carrie Ann Ryan. This is book 2, I think, in the Montgomery Inc. series. I want to read this series. I read the first few books, the first book and then the little novellas last year. Really enjoyed them, so definitely want to continue on with the series this year. And then for my other books, I have spun the spinner wheel, which I will insert here, and I got the letter R. And for this month, I've decided to go with the title beginning with the letter R. So for my Kindle read, I'm going to be reading Return to Us by Corinne Michaels. This author is one that I've heard a lot of people talk about. She seems to predominantly write small town romances, which I absolutely love. The cover for this one is gorgeous, and I can't wait to pick that one up. Then we have Ricochet by Krista and Becca Ritchie. This is part of the Addicted series. I read the first book, I think last year or maybe even the year before. I liked it and definitely want to continue on with the series, and this is book 2. And then for my historical romance, I've gone with Regarding the Duke by Grace Calloway. I also have this one on my Kindle. This is part of her series. I can't remember the name of the series, but it's historical romance. I love Grace Calloway's writing. I definitely want to finish this series, and this is, I think, book 3 from memory. Really looking forward to reading this one. And they are all of the books that I've selected for March. Hopefully I will complete all of these books. I think what I'm going to try and do is try and split it out a bit more equally, because I read the majority of my books from my February TBR in the last part of February, and I feel like I was like rushing to get them read, whereas I want to kind of try and split it out a bit more equally in March and try and read some a bit earlier in the month, and try and leave them all to the end of the month. But I hope you guys enjoyed this video. If you would like to share what you're reading in March, that would be great, and I will see you guys in my next video.